Today's topic is getting tasks to the right people. And what I really want to do today is to get you to understand the different options that you've got for the tasks and how they work together as well as how they work separately, so that you'll just really know exactly how to set your tasks up to get in front of the right people, to get them the nudges when they need to be nudged, and just ultimately get better compliance and completion of your tasks. Okay? So first, let's talk about what tasks are. So tasks are checklist items that need to be acted on or need to be completed, okay? So let's hop on over to Pipeline. And I want to first take just a super high level quick overview of how the checklists and tasks manifest themselves. They're just super quick life cycle. So let me hop over to our admin page and then checklist templates. Checklist templates is where the checklists and the tasks are born. They start here by creating a checklist template. Let me open up one that's already created here, and you can see that within this checklist template, I've got several tasks, okay? I will talk about the options here in a moment, but basically just to really understand, everything's checklist and their tasks start as a template. Then from there, checklist templates can be added to transactions, either manually by using this option here to add a checklist, or more preferably by having them set up to be automatically assigned, which you do back here when you're setting up the checklist template. This whole area allows you to auto-assign them, okay? I'm not going to go into detail about how to do those, probably because you guys have heard me talk about that enough so far, but also this is talking about something different, but just to know that setting those up automatically is the other way that you get these onto transactions, okay? Now, once these checklists are on transactions, now they are specific to the transaction. So I can make changes here, can delete items, add them, edit some of the tasks or the checklist itself, etc. And it's specific to this transaction, doesn't impact the template that created it, okay? Now, where do these tasks appear? Once the checklist has been added to the transaction, the tasks will appear in 3 different areas. On the left side of the transaction, okay? Also on the tasks page, I'll go ahead and open this in a separate tab here. So whenever a task has a due date, it will appear on this tasks page, okay? The task page shows all tasks that I've got visibility to, or the ability to view, which we'll talk about in a second. So I can see all of my tasks across all of my transactions. And if I'm an admin, I can see all of my tasks, all the tasks I've got visibility to, which means for all the agents across all transactions. So all tasks, all agents, all transactions. So it's an ideal place to come in order to manage all the tasks that need to get done. They're in date order or due date order, so I can see which is most urgent, and it prevents things from falling between the cracks because it is all encompassing. I can see everything here, okay? A super place to manage tasks. So that's the second place that tasks appear, on the transaction, on this tasks page, and then also on the daily reminder email, okay? So here's an example of one here. So each day, a daily reminder, all upcoming and overdue tasks goes out, and it will list all the tasks that I can view here or that I've got access to. Okay, so those 3 places. Let's hop back over to the transaction here. Keep those 3 places in mind as we're talking about the options that you've got for these tasks, to set these tasks up. They will appear in those 3 places. Okay, so the options I want to talk about that help control getting these tasks in front of the right people are twofold. One is determining who can view the tasks, and the second is highlighting the tasks. Okay, again, in those 3 areas. You can view them in those 3 areas, and whether they're highlighted or not in those 3 areas that we just talked about. Okay, so let's first talk about viewing. That's controlled by the visibility setting. You can set visibility. I'm going to show you right here, but we'll talk about a little bit more about how to set it up in a moment. You can control who can view a task by setting its visibility. So I can set it to be visible to anyone, which it is by default, or maybe only admins or listing agents, selling agents, listing and selling agents, right? So I've got that ability to set up who can view this task. And that's important for obvious reasons. You want whoever should be working on this task to be able to view it. But just as importantly, you want someone who doesn't need to be working on this task or shouldn't be able to see this task to not have visibility. Okay, that reduces the clutter for them, makes it more secure, etc. Okay, so visibility is important. And we'll get some offices who might think, well, you know, it's a listing checklist, and only my listing agent's going to look at it. They're not going to look at the rest of the stuff, you know, the other items that aren't listing. They'll just focus on that one. But again, the idea is to reduce that clutter. Also keep in mind that maybe in that scenario I just mentioned, with the listing agent, maybe this turns into a dual representation transaction, right? And in that case, you don't want the selling agent to see those tasks. So set that listing checklist or whatever it is, you know, up to be appropriately visible to the appropriate group of people, so that no matter what, only that group of people is seeing those tasks. Okay. One note about visibility is that keep in mind admins can see all tasks even if it's set to be visible to listing or selling agents, right? Because they need to be able to see those to manage those tasks. Setting it to be visible to admins means that only admins can see it, meaning listing agents and the other types of agents cannot see it. Okay. So that's visibility. So the next area is highlighting tasks, and that's controlled by the @mention feature or option. So keep those concepts separate, right? I can set who can see the task, and then I can also separately highlight the tasks. So keep in mind, if you highlight it for someone, which you can see down here, these two tasks I'm @mentioned on, and so they're highlighted. If you want to highlight it for someone, they also need to have visibility, right? So you've got to set, if you @mention them so that it'll highlight it for them, you've also got to make sure that they already have visibility to be able to see it. Okay? And some practical reasons for setting your @mention. It could be that maybe you're an admin and you're going to see all the tasks and you want to highlight some of them for some reason, for some meaningful reasons, some reason that they're more important to you, etc. Or maybe it could be that there are a few admins and one admin is responsible for certain things and the other is not. So maybe I'm one of the admins and I'm responsible for uploading the transaction to MLS, right? So I can @mention myself for that, even though I can see those other tasks. And maybe Mary over here, she's responsible for adding the photos. So she's @mentioned on the add photo task, etc. Okay. So different reasons, depending on what your workflow is, for perhaps highlighting it because there are certain people who are going to be completing the task, or, you know, again, whatever is more meaningful or important to your workflow. Okay. Now keep in mind, along those same lines, that when I @mention, it is simply highlighting these tasks for those people. It doesn't do anything to control whether they're seeing it or whether I'm assigning it to them necessarily. It could be that you use it for that purpose, but it doesn't necessarily assign anything to anyone. It doesn't do anything other than simply highlighting it. That is the purpose of it, is to highlight it for whatever the reason that's meaningful for your office. Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is about due date. Okay. You've got the ability to set visibility. You've got the ability to highlight. And then there is setting the due dates. Setting the due dates is not going to impact whether the person can view it based on your visibility or whether it's highlighted based on how you set that up. But it does help drive when these things happen, when things happen. So, for example, if I set, if I've got due dates associated with a task, that means that obviously I can at a glance know when it needs to be due. That's pretty critical. This item's due at a certain date. That's the most important part of it. But also it triggers whether it's going to show up on this tasks page, right? Only tasks with due dates show up on this task page, so I can manage them here. Okay. Also, it helps determine when those reminders go out in the daily email, the daily reminder email, right? Without those due dates, that doesn't drive when you're nudging these people that they need to be done. And then the last benefit of getting those due dates on there is that if you use the relative due date option, which I'll talk about in a second, meaning setting those dates to be due relative to some other date, for example, due 2 days before closing or a day, 10 days after the transaction's created, etc. Setting up those relative due date rules allows you to automate this whole process so that it's hands-free, everyone gets nudged at the right times, these appear on the appropriate pages, the task page here, etc. So setting up those relative due dates makes everything a lot more automated. Okay, and that's a good segue to hop back over to our checklist template page here, because here's where you set up those relative due dates, right? Build your business rule. And we're not going to go into detail about those, but setting these due date rules so that they automatically appear here when the checklist template gets added. And just in general, we strongly encourage whatever you're going to set up, whether it's that visibility or the @mention for the highlight or these relative due dates, that you set them up right here at the template level rather than on the transaction. Because when you set them up at the template level, every time this template's used on a transaction, it automatically comes with all this information, saving you a ton of time. Right? Of course, you can certainly do them once the checklist has been added to the transaction, but then you're going to have to do it individually for each checklist as it's been added versus doing it again here at the template level. Okay, so let's real quickly go over those two options and how to do those, namely setting that visibility and doing that @mention so that you can highlight the tasks. Setting visibility is done here. Similar to what we saw before, you can set it to be visible, let's say just to selling agents or listing agents, etc. So you can set that easily there, again, preferably at the template level. And then the @mention you set by adding, and again, I'm not going into detail about how to do this. You can learn more about that in our documentation, but and you probably are already familiar with it. But basically, @mentioning, let's say I'll use my last name here, which is the most common way of @mentioning someone. You can set that right there, and that way it will highlight it, similar to what I see down here for me. Okay, you can @mention a person, an individual, using their last name, and there are a few other ways to do that as well, or an entire role of people, the role that you've specified under manage users for them. So I can say @office staff, right? And that'll highlight it for that whole group of people. Okay. And that, I believe that's all I've got for today. That really helps control when you want these tasks to be put out, who you want to be able to see them, etc. And just really understanding those different elements of how those all play together will help you set the tasks up properly so that they, again, the right people see them and that they go out at the right times.